can't really see it.
Sorry? Oh, not as much. Yeah, well, a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can see the screen.
Oh yeah, it's hard to that one is
Yeah.
too hard, that's right. Yeah, this one's better. This one's closer.
Excuse me. Sorry, do you want to touch the moment? Oh, yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin.
Okay.
What's that?
To pay.
You- Okay.
I'm gonna turn this on.
Well, I think this one can pick up my.
Oh, it can. It's just that this helps people in the far corners
Okay,
of the room.
sure. Yes. Okay, sure. So so for like first we start talking about how to create a study, and this is basically just how to create an entity here that we can, as we think about different parts of the study and as we modify it, we can just come back to here and change it as well. So nothing is set in stone. Everything that we define here can change, of course, especially as we learn more about different data sources, how they can help, so we can add more data sources to this, we can remove it. There are few items like specific data sources and also surveys, how to design them and how to schedule them and so on. We will discuss data sources tomorrow morning and surveys in details tomorrow afternoon. So the purpose of this session specifically is just to create a dummy study. Maybe not necessarily dummy, but just a study that describes what we are going to work on, the timeline and everything else. And then we can get back to that after every session and add to that. So you already are familiar with this. To create a study, you just simply click on this Create Study link on the top left corner. So it asks for, there are multiple steps. The first step asks for...
Just a couple people are catching up here.
Oh, sure,
settling
yes.
in,
So
Be good to give another
yeah, I make
2
sure that
minutes.
everyone has reached that page before continuing. So please, like if you click on this create study link, and that brings you to start a new study page. So I just wait until everyone is at that page.
Does anyone need more time here? So get to there.
Yeah. So there are 3 things that we define at the first step. One is what's the name of the study and the institution which conducts this. Like I will give you the name, say Demo Study Workshop 2017, and the institution name would be Ethical Data. These 2 basically are, and consent form as well, and quite a few other items that we add are participant facing. So these define the look and feel of the app and the web page that it creates for the study and so on. So you should pick a name that makes sense for participants when they look at it. Sometimes the name can be catchy, like we have one study that's called Project Snap, or Snap Study, or any other name that you think it can be cool, it can make sense to people, or it can basically it can resonate with them. You can pick a name. So, but just one thing to make sure is that the name is something that will be shown to participants a lot of times. So it should make sense to them. The most important component here is the consent form. So when it comes to I think will be the 3rd day in the morning, we talk about the ethics applications and the consent process. We'll go through the details there. Studies can have a separate consent process on the paper that people can sign, or they can basically just rely on the consent form that's presented to them here. Usually the consent forms that is approved by the ethics board is longer. Mostly consent forms are a couple of pages long. But it's very hard to include a couple of pages of text here, because keep in mind that participants will look at this on their screen. so on their smartphone screen. And going through 4 pages of content through your smartphone screen is probably not the best experience. So
how do you go with ethics committees with that?
So that's a good point. So this is also something that we are also still working on the design of it. That's one of the things that we very soon we hope that we can change it, is to have 2 versions of it. Basically a shorter version that's shown to participants all the time, and a longer version that contains all the content. But this, you can potentially copy paste everything that's in your consent form here, and the app just shows it to participants. But the problem is that that's probably not the most informed consent, because if it's too long, people don't even read it. There is a paper that Nate mentioned in the morning, a review paper that talks about informed consent. They had a few suggestions that some of them I think it's very, very valuable. One of them is having a video explaining it. You can actually include a link here. This is a text editor, so if you use this, you can actually add a link here. Which a good idea would be creating a video and linking it to this, so when people are reading this, they can tap on that to watch that video. But I think so far what we have been doing is to basically just have a shorter version of the consent as well, that include that as part of the ethics application, and basically mention it that this shorter version of consent is something that we show to participants, and the longer version will be emailed to them. So they do have access to the longer version via email, but the shorter version is the only thing that they see all the time. This is, of course, for now it's just a solution for the moment until we actually can change it to include both the shorter version and the longer version of that.
So is this really the patient information sheet rather than a consent form?
Patient information sheet?
So we'd normally have a patient information sheet, and then you'd have the form that they sign. So this is really the information from the patient information sheet. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with patient information sheet, to be honest. There are some items that has to be covered here that I have taken a note of them. Which when I go through them, maybe you can explain whether it's relevant to the patient information sheet as well or not. So the items that I think it's important to be included, one is a short description of the purpose of the study. So go ahead, Kurt.
Just a question about a consent form versus patient information. So correct me if I'm wrong, but when this consent form comes up, they have the opportunity to decline it.
Yes, they do.
Which means that they don't register into the.
Yes.
So in that sense, it is consenting.
Versus
right?
for patient information sheet, they.
I'm not sure. That's what I'm just saying. Like the consent component of this is that they actually, when they
have to
when they
click on
see the
something.
consent form, they're actually given. They have to click accept versus.
Yeah, agree or disagree.
Yeah, so we will go through the process from participants' perspective as well, and there I explain at what point we start the data collection and up to what point we don't collect anything. And when they are shown the consent form, up to that point we don't collect anything. We collect some information, which I mentioned that, but we don't collect any of the data that we have requested as part of the study. So the purpose is that they have to actually read that. There will be 2 buttons there in the interface that says cancel or reject, and then register. Pressing register implies that they actually consented to the information that they were presented.
And Mohammed, maybe it's worth representing, I don't interrupt, but it is notable that in principle a study might be led not to use this mechanism for the consent. They could do it in person with a separate consent form. Is that fair to say?
They can do
or
that,
they
yes.
can do it online with an online presence. But this basically it's a preferred thing. If you can have them do it through this interface, it's easiest.
So I can think about the multiple studies that we were involved, that they were done in different forms. One of them, they did not want participants to come in person because that would affect their scale of the study. So they relied on the implicit consent of individuals, and they basically phrased the ethics application saying that participant downloading the app and reading this and pressing I agree implies that they consent to the study. And because they are presented with the consent form materials, they always have access to it through the app. So the implicit consent is collected by them basically pressing agree on this page. Another study was basically people still would come in person, and they were given a paper copy to sign, but at the same time, all the content of the paper copy were pasted here as well, so in this box, and so it was presented to them through the app as well. So they had access to that as for their records. The third format was there was this paper copy that people signed, but the research team used this place to basically present a shorter version of that. So they said, well, this paper copy stays with you for your record. Here in the app, you just see a shorter version of that basically just has highlights of it. And I think, oh yeah, there was a fourth one as well that actually they created a video. They created a video that explained what's expected from them, and they put the link for that video here. That was a YouTube video that if you press it, it would open the YouTube and would explain what the study is about. This is shown at the beginning of the study and also throughout the study. This will be right in the app interface that they can always go back to and see it. One other thing I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, so there was so the same paper also the same review paper also talks about, as part of the informed consent, the video is something useful. They also suggest to add quiz to basically ask a few questions based on the important topics of the consent form to make sure people understood it. I'm not sure how that will work out in terms of the user experience, because people probably are not really happy to go through the whole page and then go back and then start answering questions to that. But this is also something that we potentially can use, basically showing the consent form and then design an eligibility or a screening survey that has some questions based on the content of that. And only the people are eligible to participate if they answer those questions right. So I'm not defending it or I'm not rejecting it, this approach, but I'm just saying this is also one possibility here. So there is a tool you might have heard about. It's called Apple's Research Kit. Is basically a platform Apple offers for using iPhone in research studies. They have a document that explains exactly what has to be included at every step. And this list that I include as the items that has to be part of the consent form is partly based on the list that they have provided and partly based on the items that the studies that we have conducted had included. I just copy pasted here, just go through it. It was not really big enough to see. Let me see if I can zoom in. Yeah. So the items that they suggested to include in a consent form, in a short consent form for participants, includes what's the purpose of the study, what's the potential risks or benefits to the participant, what type of data is being collected. So I have to mention that what type of data being collected is actually generated automatically by Ethica and is shown to users that, well, this study collects, for example, GPS, this study collects your contact pattern and so on. But it also makes sense to include this data and also explain what this data, why this data is being collected, how it's being used, and so on. How the data is handled, and who will have access to the data, how participants can contact the research team, and what is the withdrawal process. So each of them can be just a couple of sentences explaining these items. Okay, so yes, please.
In our study, we have participants can consent to some aspects of the study and not consent to other bits and still participate. So I was wondering whether this kind of allows for that, possibility.
Yes and no. Depends what are those elements. So when you add data sources, you can specify whether the data source is mandatory or optional. I exactly like the next step that we go to. Well, I think the next step is timeline. And after timeline will be enrollment and then data sources. In the data sources, I explained that you can specify a data source to be mandatory or optional. If it's mandatory, they have to provide it. If it's optional, they basically can opt out from it. But as we talked about, surveys is also one data source. But for every survey that is issued, people can either answer it or they can cancel it. So they don't have to answer.
Or let it expire.
Or let it expire. Basically, they have options to answer it or not. So either you can rely on that, Or another project that we were involved in with a team in UK, what they did is that they designed two versions of their study, basically a more limited version and a full version. A limited version had only I think 1 or 2 data sources that they really wanted to collect, and the full version had all all the data sources that would be nice to collect. And then they give participants this option that would you like to join this study or this one? And then based on their how comfortable they are, they can join either of them. The downside of that is that people can't change their decision halfway through. They can't say, okay, no, you know what, I'm part of the full-scale study, but I want to switch back to the other one. They have to drop from the full-scale study and then join the other study, which is a lot of these things becomes logistically hard to manage if it's not done properly. I suggest using that optional versus mandatory, because then through the app there's a switch that anytime they change their mind, they can turn it on or off. They say, well, I want to opt out from GPS, or I want to opt in again and opt out, and they can do it as many times as they want. Versus if it's two separate studies, one has GPS, one hasn't, they have to say, well, I want to register in the study, now I don't want to have to drop from this one, register in the other one, and so on. So yeah, go ahead.
Now that we're starting to get quite a bit typed in here, does it auto-save, or is there a way of saving it? Or
No, so that's a good thing. It doesn't auto-save, so I suggest you type it if it's very long, especially. You can just type it elsewhere, copy-paste it here, and press next.
okay,
Yeah,
so
that's-
by pressing next, it will save what you've typed.
Actually, it just saves when you finish all these 4 steps. So, yeah. I actually never thought about that, but it's a good point. Yes, to in.
Right at the end, not to the end.
Well, yeah, we never thought that it might take. But you know what? Like you can. One thing you can do, you can actually go. Go through these steps fast, create your study, and then start editing it. And that's a trick here. But it's not. Well, it doesn't save at every step. So basically, what I mean is that you can. Let me zoom out here a bit.
Mohammed, I think for questionnaires, for surveys.
For surveys,
you
does.
actually
Yeah.
can save it along the way.
Yes, for surveys it does. It's a separate process. You don't have to define. You don't define any surveys here. Actually, you just pick. You just assign a name and consent form information and institution name. Specify the timeline which we discussed. Define what type of data that you want to collect, and then basically you're done. And then for the surveys, there's a separate survey editor which it saves like periodically until you're completely done. Then it sends it. Then it completely saves it, which we talk about it separately.
That's a good suggestion, like, to take into account of your design idea.
For
What she was suggesting is that it saves a little.
yeah, yes, for sure.
So
Yeah.
it's something to consider.
Yeah, because it's very frustrating if you. I mean, I don't know what it's like here, but
Well, but the reason it actually never occurred to me is that you will see as we go through it, the process is actually a lot faster than you expect. So probably like starting the study of this form probably would take maybe 10 minutes. The lengthiest one is the consent form, which I assume you have it typed down elsewhere as well, and that place would be the ethics documents. So you basically probably copy paste from there to here, right?
yeah,
But Mohammed, to this point, you need the approval from the ethics committee already.
For here, no. You can just create a study and start testing it. And one thing that we actually have been doing it, and I think it's a good practice to do, is to just start the study, like create it, and start testing it internally with your own research team. And people should try it out to make sure that the questions are scheduled at the right time, the length of the questions are what you expect, and so on. And at the same time, have the have the ethics application submitted and in progress in parallel. Then when the ethics application is approved, you already have a study which is hopefully either completely designed and tested and is ready to roll out, or it's very close to that stage. But because you are not going to enroll real participants for this, you don't have to have ethics approval for it.
But in Australia, you need to have the ethics approval before you can you can apply this?
Well, wait, okay,
Or-
let's be careful here. A lot of ethics boards, I can't speak for sure with Australia, but in North America, they make a very important distinction between a study conducted for research versus what could be called a technical pilot, where all you're doing is you're evaluating whether the system is viable, and you're not collecting the data for any sort of analysis, research, publication, anything like that. It's just to assess whether it's a viable scheme.
Mhm.
And at least on our side of the Pacific, and this is both Canada and US, ethics boards are very willing to deal with things that are being just tested out, but are, as long as you're not collecting data for any sort of research analysis publication, they're okay with it being evaluated at a technical level, whether it is a viable scheme. And then distinguishing that from when you enroll participants. Robin had a.
I was just going to say not only that, but you would have to do it because our ethics committees normally require very accurate information on exactly what you're going to give the
And show the
participants.
form as well.
So you'd have to have the final tested version
Yeah.
go through the ethics committee and be approved before you could use it, for example, on a patient. Yeah, so, yeah.
That's very helpful. And maybe it's partly an issue of terminology, because we need to distinguish between a pilot study,
Yeah.
where you're actually collecting data, and often it is published, and which can only be done after the ethics is all approved and everything, versus a technical evaluation pilot where it's not at all for publication, it's just, yes, making sure it works together, it hangs together, that it's viable in terms of its pieces, and it absolutely will not be used for any sort of publication. And so that may be the operative word, is sort of a technical evaluation pilot or something like that.
Yeah. And I should emphasize that it's a very iterative process. It's very hard, almost impossible, to go through this step, enter the information, and say, well, now this is complete and I'm ready to enroll participants for it. It's guaranteed, like, doesn't matter how long or you work with this system and you design, how many studies you design, it's impossible to get everything right on the first try, because sometimes the length of the questions seem not appropriate. You might want to modify it. Sometimes the wording or the number of questions that you have per page might not be what you expect, and these all affect the quality of the data that you will receive eventually. So you want to be very careful for each of those. So basically, the way that we use it is that we quickly just go. The reason that I mentioned that it never occurred to me even that there is a save step needed for here is that how I use it is that I quickly go through this. I say, well, the enrollment process is this, and these are roughly the data sources that I need, and well, this is the final configuration, and create it. Now I see how it looks, and then start adding questions to it, and then I see how it looks on my phone, and then I start adding more to it, and then I iterate through that until it becomes more established. And as you mentioned, the ethics application should have the final complete version of the study that you want to present. So either these changes should be presented to ethics as an amendment, or you have to first iterate through that, then provide your documents, and then submit the application. I believe amendment would be a lot harder. That if ethics requires to basically an approved application before you can create even a technical pilot, then the way to do it would be just to come up with your best guess at how it should work, then submit it, and then for every change that you want to make, you have to submit an amendment, which would be quite lengthy. And so yeah, I wanted to give a bit time to everyone to just basically type the points here. I am just going to enter. So for the study that I'm creating here, I'm just gonna do this. Okay, sorry. Okay, yes. Which ones? These bullet points? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Yes, I can do that. Yeah. Well, I actually think I do have the slides on this actually. The slides, it's on my side. I will share the slides separately. Yeah, I see the slides on my own screen. So it has to be short. Good. So any questions about this? Any further questions about here, this page? No? Okay. So find my cursor. Okay, so now if I press next, this stage asks about the enrollment process, and an important part is the timeline. Now it asks two questions about time and one about target sample size, but there is a lot of different variations that this one does support and a lot of ones that it doesn't support. So I go through, well, there are two parameters here that you can set. What is the study period and what is the participation period? The first one says that how long you expect the whole study, the whole enrollment, data collection and everything, not the analysis, but the data collection phase might take. Whether there is a deadline for that or it's an open-ended one. You basically just don't know. Whenever it finishes, it finishes. So that's one parameter. The other one is participation duration. How long every participant is going to participate in the study. So 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, a year, or any other period. So there are, let me go to the next slide here. There are a few common ones that I explain how you can design those timelines with this. One is a single cohort. So for example, if you have a single cohort in mind and you want all of them to start at a certain time and end at a certain time as well. So basically then you probably will do your enrollment prior to that date. All your recruitments will happen prior to that date. Then the study starts on a specific date and will continue up to a certain date and will finish then. It will be a single cohort that you want to perform the data collection on. Here you can, let me find again my cursor. Okay, there it is. Here we probably can have to select a later date. Okay, for some reason it doesn't. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So here you probably have to select a later date. That should be your best guess as by what time all your recruitment is over, because at that date the study starts. So assume that I'm thinking that I want to recruit, for example, 50 participants for this study, and it might take a month. So probably instead of May 8th, I pick June 8th, and I say it will be 1 month study until, say, July 8th. So, and the participation here I set is the same as the study. It just said 31 days. So you can see that now if I create this study, anyone joining earlier than June 8th, nothing happens until June 8th. And on June 8th, everyone's device immediately at this time starts the data collection until July 8th. So you get exactly a single cohort of the, like all your individuals in your cohort will start the data collection and end the data collection at the same time. Go ahead.
Question about the consent form. So the consent form would show up when they're joining, not when the study starts?
When they join, yes. When they join and they press consent, then they already have joined the study, but the study doesn't do anything until this date, and then at this date starts and ends at the date that's specified.
And the entrance survey would happen
after the consent form as well. Yeah, so the baseline survey is after the consent form as well. Yes. So the other one that I think is a lot more common is the rolling enrollment. That you want to collect basically 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month of data, but doesn't matter when they start. Anytime they start, they will be done 2 weeks after or 3 weeks after. There is no the synchronized timeline between the participants of the group. So then what you can do probably is to have this marked as open-ended, but this one can be late, like for example 31 days. Then this can also probably be today, the current date, which would be 8th. Okay, So in this one, anytime right now or from right now, anytime people can join, and anytime that they join, 31 days after, their participation finishes. So if they join today, they will be done June 8th. If they join tomorrow, they will be done June 9th. So every participant will have their own timeline, right? The third one is a surveillance study. Like mostly for public health surveillance projects, there is studies. There is no specific study duration or end date, right? So you basically simply can say this is an open-ended study, and the participation is also open-ended. So anyone can join at any date, and until they drop from the study, well, there is no end date for that. So this continues indefinitely on their phone.
And they may opt out.
They may opt out, but if they join back in again, it basically concatenate that their participation to this one. So it basically detects that they are the same person that are returning to the study, so it basically adds to the data. So these are three that it does support, but the ones that it does not support, I actually wrote a list of the ones that we don't support in this format. One is multiple episodes of data collection. Mostly, for example, these seasonal studies that you say, for example, for 2 weeks every season, or for example, a month per year, or any format similar to that. We don't support that timeline in this yet. So the only way that well, actually right now we are part of a couple of studies that they are using this format, and our basically the way to handle that is to create a separate study for every episode of data collection. So if it's once per season, so we create one study for every season. But this is something that will basically has to change to support this episodic data collection as well. One is that one. The other one is control versus intervention group. If you have a control group and a separate intervention group, and you have a separate timeline for each of them, or if you have, or if you want to, for example, design a separate flow for control, separate flow for intervention, that also has to be two separate studies. It can't be the same study and defining subgroups in that. So these two are, or if there's any other format that you can think of, I only could think of these five.
We might discover them more as we're developing our experimental design.
Mm-hmm.
But we might have some more ideas.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think, for example, for this study, I would probably set it as basically as from 8th to 11th, because after that we well, we don't want to collect any data, and the sample size is, I expect to enroll, say, 20 people. Yeah. Okay, so these settings. Any questions here?
Does it support like if you have to collect the 2 times data, like baseline and the intervention?
Baseline, so for every participant, collecting a baseline and
after some
a follow-up.
Yeah.
But then, how far away this baseline and follow-up will be?
6 months.
6 months.
Depends on
Yeah, that would be episodic. Yeah, so for example, 1 week or 2 days or something right now, and then 2 days in 6 months from now. Yeah, the only way to do that would be to create 2 separate studies. Yeah. But the episodic one is the one that's actually very common, and we have to probably soon add it. But unfortunately, yeah, so far it's not
Wouldn't you
included.
just have 2 surveys, one they do now and one they do in 6 months?
If it's so, it depends. If it's 2 surveys, then there are different options to use. But if there are, the type of the studies that we are talking about right now is longitudinal data collection on some sources, and longitudinal, it can't be cross-sectional surveys, right? So it has to be at least a day or 2 days for a period of time, right? But you can have like an episode of longitudinal data collection right now, and another episode later on, 6 months from now, right?
So just to clarify that point with surveys, if I could, Mohammed, so it will be no problem to have one survey set to go off at day 0, another at day, day 90 that a participant is in there. It's just, for most of the studies, they're collecting this extra intensive data involving GPS, or
Yes.
involving accelerometer. But for the surveys, they could be set to go off at any
Exactly,
point
yes.
during the study.
So the way that it can work is that you can design your studies to be 1 year long, and then you can say, issue one survey right now, then don't do anything, and then issue one other survey in 4 months, another survey after 4 months, another survey at the end of the 12 months. And it does that. But if you want to say, well, then collect GPS data for 2 weeks, and then don't collect it for 3 months, and then collect for another 2 weeks, and so on, which can be very important, especially for physical activity monitoring. You might want to see how people's physical activity behavior changes for different seasons, like summer versus winter. Then you don't want to collect data across the whole season. Just a certain period of the season is enough, right? So that one would be more problematic. Yes?
I'm actually wondering, what would be the limitation to just gathering all of the data and only using the part that you need? Because Ethica, at least if you're running on a relatively modern smartphone, Ethica doesn't have a huge battery footprint.
We will talk about that. But yeah, so the one option would be just to collect. We talk about the battery footprint. For different data sources, the battery footprint is different. And the scale of data that you have to deal with is also different. If you, for example, just work on pedometer, if the type of data that you collect is going to be GPS and pedometer and the activity recognition, basically the type of activity that they are involved. These are very small, like they're very light, much battery. But if you are recording some more large-scale data sources like accelerometer and those ones, then you are dealing with a lot more data. But yeah, that one option also would be just to collect data for a period and just pick the ones that you need and drop the rest.
If you've got a control group, can you have them all in the one study, but you've got different surveys for different groups within this study?
Yes, we actually are working with a group in Netherlands right now, and their setting involves every participant will have their own survey. So no two participants will have. Actually, the one feature that they are using is that when we get to the surveys, you see that surveys are actually a normal text file that you can edit in a text editor, like Word document, and then you import it there and it just creates it. So they basically are using a tool to automatically generate these surveys, and the surveys will be only issued to those participants. So there will be a baseline survey that asks certain questions, like for example, what is your participant ID? And then every participant ID will have their own survey. Alternatively, you can group people into multiple groups and say, for example, in the baseline survey, then you can either ask about the group, or you can ask about for example, certain features like what is your gender, what is your age, what is your weight and height. And then based on that, you can say if these are their characteristics, they will be in group 1 and they will receive these surveys. If they're in these characteristics, these are group 2 and they receive these surveys, and so on. Yeah, this will be about surveys. We'll definitely go through those in a lot more details. Yes.
Have there been any studies in Australia using?
In Australia,
Yes.
yes. So soon, probably in a week, it will start in Western Sydney.
Yeah. So we've got ethics approval for that, which is probably a useful precedent for anyone in this room. We're looking at well-being amongst university students.
So the countries that we have got ethics approval from for different institutions is being Canada, States, UK, and Australia. There's one in Netherlands in progress that has not has not formally got the approval yet. This is something that we'll discuss again will be Wednesday morning. That what ethics is looking for. There are a couple of items that's important for them. Now I'm just gonna tell the part that's that Nate's favorite topic, but I'm just gonna give you a glimpse of that. There's one is the data security and encryption, how the system takes care of this data security. That there are some technical notes that we provide usually for that. Another one is data storage, where the data is stored. So there are different options, which we will discuss. That the data can be either stored in our servers or can be stored in our servers originally and then moved to the servers of or to the computers of the institution, or directly to be stored in the institution's computers. Then the data would not even come to Canada. So if the study is done in Australia, the data will remain in Australia, so it will never go out of the country. So that gives a lot more confidence to the ethics board. Okay, so any other questions? Yes.
So is there any chance of the data ever ending up on the administrator's personal computer, on administrator's personal iPhone?
So what happens?
The data's
Mm-hmm.
collected and sent in an encrypted form to a server somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
but it never ends up on the iPhone of the researcher.
Well, so this is one thing that that I hope that we would cover in the morning. Researchers cannot use their phone for accessing the system. So we have the app that is targeted specifically for participants. Like if you have a researcher account and try to log in, it actually shows you a message that this account is a researcher account. You can't log in because there's nothing that can be done for researchers in the app. Now there's a website that both researchers and participants have access to, but a very different view. Participants will just see the name of the study that they are part of, and they have the option to delete their data. So they can go there and say that they can't see their data, but they can go there and say that, well, I want to delete all my GPS data, or I want to delete, for example, 2 weeks of my GPS data. This is to protect their privacy, and it's something that we will include in the ethics application as well. But it's to that extent. You can, of course, choose to show data to participants through the site if it's a certain intervention that you want to include. We'll talk about those as well. But we usually don't do that because of the Hawthorne effect. We don't want people to change their behavior because of having access to their data. Now researchers have access to the data through the site, which basically they access it through their computer, right? And the site receives the data from the servers. The servers are either by default our servers, which right now are at the University of Saskatchewan, or it can be your institution server. So basically then you go to the site, the same location, GPS data that we saw, and survey data, and all those data sources that we saw, the site accesses these data on the institution's computers and fetches them. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Got it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think if there's no other questions, I already said it like this. Yeah, please.
You mentioned that you have used data in Australia as well. Is there any restrictions in terms of using the software internationally, or you need a special permission or access here?
You can you can use the software anywhere. The first issue is one of the main issues is the language. So all the countries I mentioned except Netherlands, they speak English. For Netherlands, we are right now translating it to Dutch as well. We do have the Spanish version of it as well. So that's one item to keep in mind, because of course questionnaire you can type it down in the language that you intend, like for example Italian, English, or Spanish, or any other language, Dutch. But the user interface is English, so you might want to translate that. That's one concern. The other one would be, so basically you have to get an ethics application regardless of which country you are, and different countries might have different regulations. But beyond these, no, there shouldn't be any restriction. Okay, so I'm gonna press next here and go to the data sources. So the second last, instead of the third one, second last, you're almost there. The second last option step is to add data sources. And by default, it doesn't have any data sources, but you can keep adding. If you press this Add New Data Source here, it shows you a list that you can choose from. And for example, like and they're categorized as well. We have, for example, for contacts, we have Bluetooth. We will go through each of them in details tomorrow morning, that what they are, how the data from them looks like. Like for example, if you have Bluetooth data, how it looks. Well, I have to zoom in probably. Sorry.
Can you add administrative data?
Administrative data is so these are the data sources that automatically gets collected, right? But then you can cross-link these data to external data sources. That can be, for example, GIS data, can be administrative data. For administrative data, I think you should also be able to link the data that you get from participant in this form to the administrative data. Like for example, there should be some reference, for example, their EMR ID or any sort of ID that you have in the institution. And as part of the baseline, you can maybe ask that, or there is some other way to link this data to administrative data. Then you can analyze them.
So maybe we'll just say so our lab has done a huge amount with administrative data, and like in Australia, it's in a single payee system. You have these large databases, and there's a lot of interest in this. And one of the studies that we're involved with now, with another province, and that Mohammed has done incredible work for, they did ask people to have the option of reporting their it's called different things in different provinces, but their health system identification number, which could then be cross-linked electively if they chose to give it with their hospital data, diagnosis, pharmaceutical records, etc. And they left that as an option in that case to allow for this cross-linking of the two. And it is undeniable that they are highly complementary and even synergistic sources of data. What you can get through administrative data captures a lot of care seeking and sort of care delivery information that would be a little bit burdensome to inquire about and probably not so reliable if we only relied on Ethica. But vice versa, Ethica provides a huge amount of risk factor information and behavioral information that's not captured in the administrative data. So huge potential. It's a very practical issue. And like Mohammed said, just as with linking with weather data, this issue of linking up the data collected by Ethica with external data sources is very much part of the ecosystem of how Ethica delivers value.
Yeah. And it's administrative data is one sort. The weather data or environmental data that Nate mentioned is another source. But generally, this data, it becomes a lot more valuable when you cross-link it with external data sources of any sort. Whether it's GIS data, whether it's traffic data, whether it's weather data or administrative data, and this all should happen as a post-processing. So first you collect data of this sort, and then you can cross-link that, or not necessarily post-processing. You don't have to wait all the data collection to finish, but when the data starts to flow in, you can start cross-linking that with your data source and basically start doing the analysis, or start modifying the study and revising it as it turns out to be necessary. There is a list of data that is right now is supported. We will go through each of them tomorrow and explain what they are. And you can see the last one is survey responses. You can select, for example, that you want survey responses. Each of these data sources can be optional or mandatory. It asks whether it's mandatory or not. You can select here that, for example, this is not mandatory. And if it's not mandatory, it shows a switch to the user through the user interface when they join the study. As I mentioned, as part of that, Ethica shows to participants what sort of data they're providing. So for example, here, if I pick GPS up here, and this is not mandatory, in the list it will show them that you're providing location data, and there's a switch in front of it that's by default on. But if they tap on it, it switches back to off, and it does not collect GPS data. It just takes a note that user opted out from providing location data. And this remains like that until they actually switch it back on again.
It may be worth just as a forward pointer noting that there's a mechanism by which participants can opt out, a so-called snooze option.
Yes, we'll go through the user interface for that.
Of sort of sensor data across the board in addition.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not going to go through the details of that because I actually wanted to spend time, sometime tomorrow morning, and explain each data source separately because it easily takes a few hours and it's worth like going to each of them in details. For example, for contact pattern, you can have it in Bluetooth versus you can have it with beacons. There are considerations for each of them. There are pros and cons for each. Similar to that for digital footprint, environmental data, and so on. So right now, I'm just gonna go with two simple ones, like basically two most obvious ones, like GPS and survey responses. We will modify it tomorrow as we go through the sensors tomorrow, and we talk about each of them. Then we can also come back to here and, well, not here, but to study modification and add or remove more data sources. If it turns out that we don't need location data, we can remove it. If it turns out that we need, for example, physical activity data, we can add it, and so on. So pressing next here, it takes us to the last step, which basically just has two options only. It says that whether you want people to opt out from the study or not. If you choose that you don't want to allow them to opt out from the study, they still can do that by uninstalling the app. But this is just another way to control or control the dropout of your study. You want to know how many people drop out from the study and why. So having this option enabled is helpful, but you optionally can just uncheck it, and people still can uninstall the app if they want to.
But the issue is here, you know if they opted out.
If they do that, you will know.
Whereas if they uninstall it, you just know the data stopped coming.
Yeah, you just know the data stopped coming in, but you will not. You will be completely blind to the reason until you contact them.
So reasons don't come up. They can't put a reason in for why they dropped out.
No, but if you actually choose this, then you can define a survey that the survey will be asked right before they drop out. So if when they click on it and says, well, we will see that. Actually, right now I did create a study that has all those components, and I will have two Android and iPhone here that in the screen will see that how that one is issued. The last one is the background of the study. This is you basically can upload an image of this size, and everywhere in the app that image will be shown. It really it helps to have a certain look and feel for the study that is relevant to the topic. So I'm not gonna well, actually maybe I do. So I'm not gonna for now upload anything, but we go check other studies that do have an image here for their background. If I press create study, it works. It works on it. And
There could be other people creating it too.
There we go.
yes, it's done. So it takes a bit of time because it actually sets up the data storage space and everything for it, because every study has its own data storage space. But what it did create it, and now it basically says that, well, you also had survey responses. Do you want to create surveys right now? If I say yes, it just takes me there. Yes, so basically that's. Now I have two of it with exactly the same name. I'm gonna go to this one. Here you can see that, maximize this. Yeah, here you can see that, for example, this is the same study that I created. Starts from May 8th for 4 days to May 11th. And this is the consent form that I created. I can, of course, edit any of these here. If I press edit, I can start basically just changing this as needed. One thing is that you can share, by default, you are the only one who has access to the data that comes to this study. You can add more people to it if you want. for example, in this access permission, only people listed here will have access to the study data. No one else can see the study data. Here I'm going to remove Nate. You sure? Yes. And if I want to add him again, I think uses.ca. I think that's his email address. And there you go.
Thank you.
Yes, no, you're privileged again. So yeah, anything else? So basically, everything that we defined there, you can modify it here. I'm going to cancel this. And the same with data sources. We did add GPS and survey responses, but here I added a bit more. You can see it has motion, battery, survey responses, Wi-Fi, and so on. You can either remove them, like for example, if I don't want this, I can remove this. It says, are you sure? Yes, I want to remove this. So it's removed. Or I can again add a new data source here. So if you can add anything that you need, you can remove the things that you need, you don't need. So yeah, so as I mentioned, you can modify every step of the study easily, but that's actually it's a bit misleading. If there's no participant in the study, it's okay. You can just modify it as much as needed. But if the study is actually live and you have people enrolled in the study, every change that you make, you have to consider multiple points. Like first is that it takes time for this change to be sent to all the individuals. The change is immediately sent out, but if they are not online or if their phone is turned off at the moment and so on, it might take up to 4 weeks for them to receive it. So by changing something, you are actually basically everyone who registers right after, they will get the latest version of that. But anyone who joined before, you will have a stage that different people in your study have different version of it running. And we also don't keep track of the changes that you make. So when you make a change, there is no history going back. So we don't manage the revisions. So it's also something to keep in mind. When you make a change, you have to keep in mind that there is no revision that can be managed. The revisions can be managed by surveys. If you have a survey, you can have multiple versions of that, which I think is actually make it complicated, but if it's necessary for a study, that is an option. But for the study itself, no. So as long as there is no participant in the study, you can change it as much as needed without a problem. Or while it's in the technical pilot, you can change it as much as needed. But if the study is live, you still can change it, but you have to keep that in mind.
Mohammed, remind me, is there a mechanism through the administrative interface to examine whether or not someone has received the latest push to them, or study configuration, or survey push to them?
We do have this data stored on as part of the data, but it's not as part of the study data, but it's not still presented through the user interface. So we know who received it when, but we don't. But still, is not presented here. So we're working on that to present it here as well. So if you make a change, you will know that your participants, which of them received that change when. But so that can be helpful. But still, it still makes changing the study while it's live, especially major changes like adding data sources to it, removing it, making major changes to the surveys, can make the analysis very complicated. Yes, please.
If you remove a data source midstream, what effect does it have on stored data prior to?
I actually was going just to talk about it.
So it's still safe.
The data is not removed. So when you actually remove a data, so right now this study has only tables of data for these data sources. If you add a new data source, it creates a new data table for that data source. But if you remove it, it doesn't delete the table. It keeps the table there. The only case that we delete the data is through the participant's user interface, through the participant's dashboard, and under their profile there is a delete data there's a delete data page that if they go there and choose the data and press delete, we delete our copy completely. But then, as I said, the research team can decide to move the data to their own servers, right? We don't have access to that server. then there's a separate copy that we don't have access to. So as part of our privacy policy, we have mentioned that the researchers are also obligated to remove the data when the participant asks for it. And I'm pretty sure part of any ethics application, that's a requirement. So that has to be removed separately. That's the only part that we remove it. If you want the whole table to be removed from here when you make a change, it's basically something that you basically have to contact us and say, you know what, drop this table, I don't need it anymore. Yeah, and then when we drop it, the data is not recoverable anymore. It's completely gone. So, any other questions about this? Let me check if I talked about all the items that I had. They had many written here. Yeah, so basically that's pretty much it for creating the study, and when is the?
I think we were going to try next the tea breaks at 3.
At 3.
So we
okay.
can. I think we want to show the participant experience on the
yes.
app.
Yeah. So
with respect to this study.
So the study that I created was this number. So well, let me find my cursor again. Okay, there it is. So this study that I just created right now is this study number. Well, load. Yeah, 220. But I also created one before here with ID 213 that has a few surveys as well. And the surveys is basically just, it has one eligibility survey that asks a few questions, one baseline survey, one survey for dropout, one survey for the support of physical activity, and which is user triggered. This will be a proactive self-report through the user interface. People can click and respond. Another one for barriers to desired physical activity, which is also user triggered, and one ecological monetary assessment, which is expected to be issued every day at 8 p.m. So I said it this way. We can just check the details of the surveys, but I'm gonna see how participants will see this study. We'll see basically the user interface of this. So they can participants either can use this ID to join the study, or we can just email them this link. If we email them this link, when they open this link on their phone, whether they have the app installed or not, they will be navigated through all the steps that's needed for them to download the app, join the study, and so on. Now, I'm gonna show how this works in an Android phone and an iPhone. Let me see, where is the Android phone? It's here.
So the study registration is an ongoing number?
Sorry?
That number that gives automatically when you register the study is a continuous one?
No, it's just one number for every study. Now,
yeah,
for example, mine is,
for example, I created mine is 224.
Yeah, it's a unique number.
It's a unique
number, yes. That's so yours is 224, mine is 213, and so on. So each study has a unique number associated to that.
And basically what that means, Roberto, is that if you give that number to someone, they can say, I want to join this study. And they'll see the consent information for it, etc. So it provides a way of them basically indicating what they want to join.
And how many of these studies are active studies?
Are what?
Active studies, like real studies.
I think there is close to like the studies that have consent form and are collecting data from real participants, right? It's something around maybe 40 something of them.
That are current or past.
Yeah, current or past.
With
yes.
Ethica.
Yeah.
And with IEPI, there were a large number of others.
So these are two simulators. The one on the right side is an Android phone, and the one on the left side is an iPhone. They simulate everything just like phone, but the thing is that they don't have an app store, so I had to already install the app on them. That's why you see the app already is installed. But I haven't logged in, so it's just like the phone, the app right after the installation. So I'm going to show how it, for example, works if you want to do with the URL. I go with
So they won't have to type this out, they'll just tap on it
Yes.
in an email or something.
They don't have to type it out. They don't have the app installed, and they also will receive this in an email. And they just tap on it and it opens it for them. But because I don't have the Google Play Store or Apple's App Store here on these simulators, I had to install it myself, and I don't have an email account here either, so I have to type it down to just show it. But from
Well, we'll install it on people's phones in this room, right? So they'll be able to go through that link process.
yeah, so well, okay, sorry. Apparently, as soon as I typed it here, it took me to the app. It recognized it. And if I had if you see that if I type HTTPS where is it? Okay, here it is. So because I have the app installed, when I press enter here, it actually doesn't open it in the browser. It opens it in the app. And it would be the same case for real participants as well. If they had the app installed, even if they're not logged in, as long as they have the app installed, opening the link, it opens it in the app and not in the browser. If they don't have the app installed, it opens a web page here, and it just tells them that tap here to be taken to Google Play Store to download the app. When they download the app and they press open, it takes them to this page, which I press sign up, and then it takes me here that asks me questions. Now, you will see after this that when I enter this information and log in, it doesn't show me anything about the home screen or asking any number or anything. It just basically shows me consent form that we typed there directly. So the same thing here. I'm just going to press sign up. So a couple of information we ask for people to join, for participants to join, and explain why we ask each of them and what are the effects of this for the ethics application and the anonymity of the data. One is the name. So we don't require people to enter a full their real name, but we ask for the name. It's used in multiple places. First, we basically anywhere in the app, that's how we address them, by name, like any other app, basically. So it can be a fake name, a pseudo name, or any sort. The only place that the name becomes important if your study involves recruiting networks. So if your study involves recruiting the individual as an ego and a few of their friends or their network member as alter, if there is any survey issued based on their interaction, then the name has to be a real name, because when the other person sees that name, should recognize it. For example, one of the studies that we had, they recruited networks of people, networks of size between 2 to 4. So, and there was surveys scheduled to be issued when, few hours after people in the same network met. So for example, if I meet Kurt and after a few hours, I get a survey that have you met a name? And then this is the name that we use. And if this is a fake name, it just shows me have you met a fake name before. And I can't recognize what that name is, right? So that's the only part that the name has to be real, but except that, not necessarily. Email address and password. So email address, which of course we need an email address to just, as Nate mentioned this morning, for people to be able to access their account, whether here or through the website, to access their own data.
And if they forget their password.
And the password, of course, as well. One thing I wanted to mention with the email is that we don't validate the email. You can enter an email address that is not valid. Basically, just make up an email address and just use it. But then the problem is that if you lose your credentials, you can't recover it. That's one thing. One approach we have seen that in one study they have used it is that they have created a catch-all email address. So basically, like Google allows you to, in Gmail, you have your email address. For example, for mine would be mohammed@gmail.com. Anything comes after plus a number would be still my email address. I type it down here so you see how it would work. So for example, here this is my email address, for example, right? If this would be also my email address, these are all my email addresses. Then the way that it works is that, for example, for my study, I have, say, 100 participants. I create one email address for the study, for example, projectsnap@gmail.com, and then for every participant, the unique email address would be projectsnap plus 001@gmail.com plus 002 plus 003. This works as well. Then participants don't have to have their own email addresses, enter their email addresses, so we don't have anything about their email addresses in our system. The challenge there is that the study staff should manage the credentials of every single participant in the study. And participants cannot access, cannot restore their email address or their password. If they forget their password and they go to our site and press forget password to recovery, the email is sent to the project coordinator, right? So there are ways to manage it if you don't want your participants to enter their email addresses. It still works, but it depends on the context. Okay, so I'm just going to sign in here.
So if you don't do that, the data isn't truly de-identified, or?
So that's something that again we discussed, I think, on Wednesday morning, that how the data is de-identified. The way that we do it is that we store these in two separate data storage. We store people's metadata in one data storage, and we store people's study data in a separate data storage, and these two are linked via an ID, participant ID. And if you actually delete the data from the data storage, from the metadata storage, then it's similar to that you have in a lot of clinical studies as well, that you basically have the top part of that with the participant information, you rip that off, throw it away, then it's de-identified data.
Or what's called a master table, at least in North America often.
Master table.
And it's a temporary thing, so you can get in touch with participants during the study, but then it's destroyed, and all that's retained is de-identified identifiers, and that's
yeah. So this is not for the data anonymization. This is mostly for perceived sense of privacy. So if people think that whether the study staff or participants think that, well, with all things that you said is good, but I still prefer not to enter my email address here, sure, you can use this method. It works as well, but it's not really has anything to do with the data anonymization.
You're talking about this method with
the email address here. Yes, the email address here. Actually, the study that I meant, we own, like out of that 40-something studies, there was only one study that used this approach, and they were very much concerned about it. So they decided that they manage all the credentials, but they still use this approach. So this is the iOS. I'm just gonna enter here. So an email address would be ios.test@. Okay, so the same thing here as well. Right? I think I have this one and this one. Okay, so that's just the introduction page. You just press next, join a study, wait before consent, own your data, done. So that's this one. Same thing here, join a study, wait for consent, own your data, done. Okay, oh yeah, here we didn't use that method. So this one went direct. So okay, the difference, the reason that this one came here, actually it doesn't show it as good. I'm not sure if I can zoom in here. No, it doesn't zoom in, sorry. Oh. I'm wondering what this one does. Oh, definitely not zooming in, so. Anyway, so this dialog, you probably can't read it. It says, I can't read it either. So it says something about like GPS. It asks permission for GPS, and the reason that this let me try to.
So in order to record when you answer a question,
In order to record, where you are, where you answer each question, Ithaca needs to have access to your GPS. So one thing is that the data source that the data sources that we record, we also have to get explicit permission from participants that we do record those ones. And this is required both from Android and iOS. Both of them require us to showing a dialogue to people and saying that, well, we are recording your GPS, would you allow it or not? So the reason that these two shows two different things is that if you remember, we used the URL here. So it directly came to the study and it checked that there's a screening survey for this, so showed the screening survey. But in order to just record where person are answering those, the individual is answering those questions, it asks for permission for GPS. I can just simply say, not now. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay, I see. That's what it does. Good. Okay, so well, I just left this as well. Good. Okay, so I say not now, and you can see it asks one question here. Are you 18 years of age or older? So for the same, to get to the same spot here, I'm just going to press join study and enter the code 2013. I'm going to press join study. What is the code? The code is 2013. Fine. Says you must complete an eligibility survey in order to register in the study. Continue. See the same flow. There are some differences, but it's because of the platform, the Android versus iOS. It says allow Ethica to access your location while you use the app. Given your permission, your location will be recorded for each answer that you provide. So I press allow here, then basically ask the same question. So I have said that people here are eligible if they are 18 years of age and older, and also they enter the correct code. So the registration code here is 2017-05. 1705.
So is that individual to the participant?
So this is a way that I wanted to show how you can restrict the enrollment in your study. If you want only people who you allow to join the study, you can come up with a random number and then share that number with people who you want to join the study. And only people who have that number can join. Now I randomly set this number, 2017-05, and so only people who know what they enter, they can answer this. Here I'm going to enter something else. Here I'm going to enter.
Mohammed, but
yes.
For a lot of studies, so that's an elective thing. I mean,
yes, that's an elective thing.
For a lot of studies, you don't do that at all, right?
Yeah, you don't have to do it. Yeah, so this is, I defined an eligibility process here, a screening process, and I said first they have to be 18 years of age and older, which that was the first question. Second, they have to know the code that I have assigned to it, which is 2017-05. If I don't want to have that, I can just say 18 years of age and older and done. But here I wanted to have both, right? Now if I answer 2018, submit, says that you are not eligible to join the study, okay, goes back. Because I didn't have the code right. The same if I say, no, I'm not 18 years of age and older, it just follows the same process. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go to study 2013, find, wait, continue. Oh, one thing you notice is that it didn't ask for GPS permission this time, because the application recorded that we do have permission to access GPS, so it didn't ask again. If I would go back to iPhone settings, and then it shows me the list of applications that do have access to GPS, and say, well, don't allow this app again to access GPS, it again would ask that, would you allow us to access it? If I say no, then, well, I wouldn't have access to GPS. So this time I say yes here. And here I also enter the correct code, which is 2017-05. You see, it doesn't show the keyboard here. That's a glitch with the simulator. If it was a real phone, it actually would show I think even you can come here in somewhere around here and say the show keyboard. Well, anyway, done. If I press done here, press submit. Now this time it shows me this, and I'm going to do the same thing here as well. Press submit. Okay. So you can see that the same stuff that we entered there is shown here as well. Demo study workshop 2017 is it's managed by Ethical Data, and this is the timeline. Now, if it was a rolling enrollment, participants are completely blind to that. It just, they see that they join from May 8th to, for example, June 8th, or May 9th to June 9th. They don't need to know anything about the timeline of the study as a whole, right? They just know about their own participation period. That for this case is from May 8th to open-ended. Basically, just continues indefinitely. The same content that we entered is shown here. If it was multiple pages of content, you could scroll this for quite some time. Yeah. But here, the one that we entered was quite short. I actually maybe can show one that is quite longer and see how it looks. It's.
Do you find that people don't? Less is more. So
that's exactly exactly the issue. That's why. So less is more. I totally agree. And the thing is that, but still the thing is that we have to have that longer form of consent form. Yeah. Because of both ethics application, and also some people might be actually interested to have that. That's why one of the changes that we are working on is to have two versions of the ethics of the consent form: a longer form and a shorter form. Shorter form being shown at here and all the time, and a longer form being somewhere in the menus that if people are really interested can go and look at it. Yeah. So I think one of the long ones is this one. Actually, I think this one is so long that sometimes it has problems showing it. This is literally exactly copying and pasting everything that was part of the ethics, like the consent form, paper consent form here. You can see it starts with purpose of the research, main objectives, and now I will continue and see how long it goes. Yeah, so it goes on and on up to this point, yes. It talks about the investigators, who they are, and then it talks about the data that's being collected. So I'm just going to cancel this one and go to our own study of 213. Continue. So I'm just going to this time go through this quickly. Yes, my code is 2017-05. Done. Submit. So here. So this part is the text that we included, and as I said, the type of data that is being collected is automatically generated by a system and is shown, and you can see it here. That, for example, it says this study collects the following data sources, and it shows the list here: location, motion, survey responses, and battery. I think here the list is a bit longer. The reason that the list here is a bit longer is that some of these data sources, for example, screen state and app usage statistics, are not possible in iOS, are not available in iOS. iPhone does not provide this type of data. That's why this automatically excludes them. So it doesn't even show them. There's no point to showing them. Right?
Even if in your design you put those in there, it just doesn't show up on the
It just doesn't, yeah, you just don't get that type of data from iPhone users. Yeah. So here I have two options, cancel and register. And as I mentioned, register is basically implicitly shows that people are consented to this study. So let me just check if I did go through all the items. Participants interface. This one we discussed, the registration, consent form. Okay, so as I mentioned, up to this point, we don't collect any of this data. Any data on motion, location, survey responses, battery, nothing. The only type of data that we collect One is some basically operation information about how the app behaves, which is only used for basically improving the app or debugging the app in case that there is a problem. That's the only type of data that we record. And the other one is that how many people saw this page and how many people answered the eligibility form in what form, which made them eligible or not eligible. Because you also do need statistics on basically how your enrollment is going, right? For example, 100 people downloaded the app and answered the screening question, this form, and they were not eligible because of, for example, they were less than 18 years old, or because they were more than 18 years old, but they didn't know the code, or, well, I assume you have different questions in your screening phase. But we do collect responses to the eligibility surveys, because it's valuable to just have some statistics on how the study enrollment is progressing. So I think if I press register here, if I press register here, okay, so a bit of a different flow, but they both serve the same purpose. Here it says allow Ethica to access your location even when you're not using the app. Because this study has requires monitoring location, you get this one, that we need your permission because the data collection may require occasional access to GPS during your participation period. I press allow. And also, well, Ethica would like to access your motion and fitness activity. Oh, these dialogues are from Apple. Basically, because we are accessing that part of the iPhone, it just shows a message. Exactly, this message is from Apple, this message is from us, if I want to be very specific. Because we want to access motion and fitness activity, and then we explain here that we do need this because we can collect pedestrian-related data such as step counts. Okay, and it also says that there's a pre-study survey. Let's do it now. It comes here. Okay, I didn't expect this one. Okay.
No, Mohammed, are you hoping they will go through this with you?
No, I just want to explain how, yeah, you don't have to follow it. So I just want to explain that when you design your study, how the participants will experience this. Okay, so I will explain what these things are, but let's go to the survey now. So basically asks questions here. Are you male? Male. Next. My weight is, what is it? Oh no, this is my height. Okay, my height is like 186. Sure, same thing here. My height is 186.
There you can select the units.
Yes, you can select the unit. Actually converse. Like I'm 6.61, just 6.1 versus 186, and so on. Next. Next. Wait, please. Say 85. Or I wish I was 85. Okay. So done. I submit.
We can actually take a photo of your weight scale.
No, trust me, I made it. Okay.
Do you have to put a photo in after you've said your height and weight, and then please put a photo?
Well, yeah. And then basically, as I mentioned, there are two user-triggered buttons here that we designed. One for barriers of physical activity, one was for support of physical activity. And you can see there are two buttons created here. First, the same background that we added there, well, that I added there in the previous one, but in the new one we didn't add. You can see the background is shown here for both of the studies. Now it looks a bit different on different phone screens, especially for Android. You have all different sizes from tablet to small phones. For iPhones, most of them are the same size. So the background is shown here, and also the name of the study is shown here. The data sources, about, and actions here. Actions basically are separate buttons, each button for one of the surveys that we wanted people to have access to and report anytime they want. For example, the first one is called photograph support for physical activity. The second one, photograph a barrier to desired physical activity. I'm gonna start each one from here and one from here. The thing is that actually the simulator does not have access to a camera. That's why probably I can't even probably take a photo, camera error. But if it was a phone, you could actually take a photo here. And you can basically just start recording your responses here. Well, it just plays here. I can hear it, trust me. Here you can see that there are a lot of parts that we have to ask for permission. I'm not going to go through the details here, but for example, here it says we need to have access to microphone in order to record your response. And that is shown because we don't have access to microphone. By default, we have to ask for it, and people have to at first allow us doing that. So if I press allow microphone access, you see that this dialog is not something that we manage. This dialog is something that the Android phone manages itself and says, allow Ethica to record audio. I can say allow or deny. If I say allow, now it shows me all the components here for it. So basically, user provides explicit permission for us to do this. So I can either leave the survey, which basically is marked as cancelled. Nate mentioned a couple of times that a survey can be explicitly cancelled. If I press quit or cross in Android, basically it says if you leave this survey without completing it by pressing leave, you will not be able to complete it at a later time. If you wish to complete this survey, press back. Otherwise, if they want to just pause the survey and respond to that later, they can just leave the survey. Like for example, I can, I think how the back button is, okay, I think it's this one. Yeah, so I can go home, and it shows that there is one notification here. And if I go back, the survey is there, I can answer it. But if I don't want to answer it, I can just press quit and say, yeah, I want to leave the survey. I'm not gonna do that, but, or I can submit it and say, please ensure all the answers. I think, oh yeah, I mentioned that some responses are mandatory, some are optional. I think one of the responses here are mandatory. Probably it's a photo question. That's why it doesn't allow me to submit it. So I can just press quit. Okay, submit, it says the same thing. Some mandatory questions are left unanswered. I'm saying yes, show, so cancel. So the consent form that we wrote is shown here. You can see the text that's shown here, the same consent form. So if it's long, it would be a very long text here. And the data sources, I think the data sources here are all marked as mandatory. So I set all of this as mandatory. If it was optional, you would see a switch here that people could turn it off and on, which of them they want to provide or which of them they don't want to provide. The last thing I wanted to show is the basically dropping out of the study. If they go to study settings, they can press drop out of the study. Are you sure? I say yes. Well, it says actually, you have successfully left the study. Oh, maybe I didn't define. Yeah, probably I didn't define the dropout survey for this. I thought I did. Anyway, I'm gonna register back in.
Do you want to show how you can snooze it?
Yes, that's why I registered back in again in the study. Oh, actually, iPhone doesn't have a snooze one. Yeah, iPhone doesn't have a snooze one, I think. Yeah, it's something that we have to still add. Android does have, that's how you see this green button here, which if you pause it. So one of the items that we include in the ethics is that people can pause the data collection anytime they want for 1 hour. So I think this is something that we still have to implement in Android, in iOS. But in Android, if you actually open this menu up here, there's a green button here that says it's recording. You can just press it, and then it writes down that's paused for 1 hour. Yes, Amelia?
So data collection for things like GPS starts as soon as the participant registers for the study?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So I wanted to go through a few items about how iOS behaves. So iPhone, it's different with Android in the sense that Android, you can upload an application to the store and it gets approved. Well, there is no review process. You upload it, it's live after maybe a few hours. iPhone is different. iPhone has a review process that they have a team that will review every application individually, and then assuming that the application is compliant with all the review guidelines, then they allow the application to be released. And they are extremely strict about the privacy and basically just how the data is, what type of data is being collected and how the data is being used. So we had, I think, close to from November exactly to March, back and forth with them until we could basically push our application in and convince them that this area of the data collection is actually something useful. And we got lucky because at the same, well, a bit before, they also released this Apple's Research Kit, which basically means that they are okay with the whole concept of using phones for research projects. As part of that, we had to do multiple things. One of them was to provide a detailed privacy policy and terms of use that is available. This privacy policy and terms of use is basically a collection of the materials that we use for our ethics application, which we basically provided to Apple as well, and they approved it. The other thing was that they said we have to have a user-facing feature to basically show users what type of data is being collected, and that's what the report button here is. So if you actually click on the report button, you will see a map. Maybe in the simulator it doesn't load it. Oh, actually it does. I think I'm not sure how in the simulator I can zoom out. But anyway, this is a map of somewhere. I think the place that we are right now. Which street is this? Anyway, so this shows a report of the GPS data we have collected from participants for the past 24 hours. So I know this might cause problem with some studies, exactly studies that they might believe that like like basically this type of data can cause behavior change for the participants, but it was non-negotiable. So we had to include in our app in order for the application to be live.
And that's an iPhone specifically?
That's an iPhone specific, but we are actually adding it to the Android as well because both applications have to be identical. So I think in next few months we will have, probably next month we'll have it in Android as well. Yes, sorry, go.
Mohammed, do you see your Ethica as an application of the Health Kit?
So Health Kit is a collection of the data sources from different applications that provide any health services. It works as an aggregator. So basically, you have your Fitbit, you have your Apple Watch, you have your, for example, your there's an application called Endomondo for running. All this sort of data, and you have, for example, sensors that we talk about, like motion sensors, pedometer, and accelerometers, and so on. They all provide some sort of health information. They all go to HealthKit, and then HealthKit provides some API for other applications to use it, and also provides some report for user themselves. Like, for example, what's been your average heart rate? What's been your, for example, number of steps you have taken every day? It's not necessarily used for research purposes. For research, the package that Apple offers is called Apple's Research Kit. Now, the problem with Research Kit is that it's something that we call it API or programming interface. It offers you some of these functionalities as a set of functions. Now you have to build your program on top of it. You basically have to create it from scratch. There are multiple limitations with that. One is that there is no support for Android, because of course it comes from Apple, and Apple is never going to create a platform for Google, right? Because they only are concerned about their own ecosystem, right? There are systems that offer Research Kit for Apple as well. There are companies that do that, offer Research Kit for Apple as well.
For Android.
For Android as well. So that's the first restriction. The second one is that it's not similar to the system plug and play, that you can go to somewhere and say, I want to some website and say, I want this data source and this data source and this data source, and then boom, you have like basically your application. You have to start creating an application from scratch for it. basically now you have a bunch of software programs, functions that you can call, and then you have to start creating your software. It gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also makes it complicated, because then actually you have to write the program in-house and manage it. There is a company called Sage Bionetworks that they do offer solutions based on Apple ResearchKit, and I believe they host the data as what they basically write and program the back end of that as well, the data storage and all sorts of sorts of items and that. But they have a different focus. They basically they work on studies case by case. So for each study, they start creating it from scratch. There are some advantages, some disadvantages. The advantages is that you have a lot more flexibility. The study is basically just has the look and feel and the brand of your study, especially for larger scale studies. That makes a lot more sense. But it's also not very cost effective. These things are actually very expensive to write, and usually, like for example, one of the studies that Nate will talk more about it is a study called the Human Project. Is one of the very detailed studies that done of this form in I think they are monitoring 10,000 people in New York City for 10 years, and the cost of development are something around $10 to $15 million. So these are very expensive projects if you want to actually do from scratch. Yes.
The Apple ResearchKit you mentioned, how compatible is that? Because I know some people in Australia are trying to use the Apple ResearchKit for doing research in the same area.
So so a lot of things that we offer here, you can also basically implement it with ResearchKit. One of our options when we wanted to implement our iPhone version was to use ResearchKit. Basically, we could use ResearchKit and then build on top of this, which basically would then lead to this application. We did not use that because of some technical issues. We thought it's better to implement some parts ourselves, because then we could have more flexibility in the visualizations that we wanted, for example, the way that we wanted to present surveys and so on. But that would certainly be an option for us to use ResearchKit to build on top. But as I said, ResearchKit definitely requires for you to code, to program everything from scratch.
It basically requires you to maintain a decent size software development project.
Yeah, so the thing is that if you don't have anyone with the expertise of iPhone development and website, basically backend development, backend being the server side data storage, data encryption, and so on, and the web development for the user interface of that, it would be impossible to run anything without that. So it doesn't mean that that you can't use it, but it means that you need those expertise either in-house or as part of some of your collaborators. Then that would be an option. Well, you also need, especially if you want to run on iPhone as well, you need on Android as well, you need an Android development too. I'm not sure about basically the ratio of Android to iPhone here. In the States and Canada, iPhone is very dominant. In Europe, it's not like that. In Europe, Android is more prevalent than in iPhone. In US, many people have iPhones. Probably like maybe close to more than 70% of people have iPhone, and less than 30 have Android.
And one other very important point has to do with flexibility. People talk about the theory of real options. Flexibility has value. And one of the issues here that's a very significant issue, and I speak as a professor of software engineering, is that achieving a system that is flexible enough to adjust over time the settings of that. So suppose you're trying to run a study and you want to roll out new survey instruments or change the frequency with which they are issued, or change aspects of the triggering condition, or you want to modify some aspect of the user experience, such as the background image, or you want to correct a typo. In order to build a system that is that requisite level of flexibility requires a great deal of effort. And that is something which Ethica has built in the sense that you can easily adjust a survey and ask, send it out to participants, you can roll out a new survey. And in fact, when the Ethica application gets, changed in some way, it can be automatically updated on people's phones. And that offers some very significant advantages when you're going to run a study that runs for a length of time. You want to make sure that whatever you do, you have that ability to kind of change things as needed without asking people, come back and meet the study coordinator so we can update your phone. And that used to be an issue for us with versions of the IME system. And it's a very important consideration.
Yeah.
Flexibility.
And so again, I have to emphasize that it doesn't mean that our system has an advantage and they don't. It comes at a price, and the price is the flexibility. So if you are designing a study that, for example, you can think of an action that they have to do, which ours doesn't support, for us it would be harder to integrate it, right? While you can start coding that from scratch yourself. So then Apple's ResearchKit offers you that, because it's a programming language, right? And with a programming language, you have all the flexibility that the system offers, while us is an abstraction layer on top of that. And that's the same theme that you see in all the studies that are designed with ResearchKit. They all have, like for example, this My Heart Counts study, or there's another study about Parkinson. I forget the study name, but if it's Rochester University, they all have components that are unique to their study. And they basically had the ResearchKit, of course, which helped them, but then they had to bring the expertise or work with a company like Sage Bionetworks or other collaborators to build that from scratch, which will, of course, provide them flexibility, but costed a lot more.
And build the Android version.
Build the Android version as well. I'm
And
not sure if some of them do have it. Yeah, I think some, like for example, My Heart Counts has only iPhone. It doesn't have Android, and some of them are iPhone only. Yes, wait.
So when you say build from scratch, does that mean for each study you have to build an app from ground up?
Yes, exactly. So it's one app per study. Yeah, so it's not one. So and that's something very favorable to quite a few cases. So one, for example, application that can be helpful is that if the brand of the application matters. So still in this case, still people have to download an application named Ethica, which might not resonate with them what that is. So for some studies that was a concern, we basically created an application for that group based on their brand, because the brand mattered for their community, right? They recognized the name, they recognized the logo and so on, so it mattered for them to be branded under their name. So what we did, we basically reskinned this and uploaded as a new application.
So it had a new skin on top of the basic application.
Yeah, it's actually very much similar. One of them is an application called Alberta Prevents Cancer. If you search for that, you will see it's a completely different application and everything. Completely different logo and name and everything, but the application looks very much similar to this, and you see that only the theme has changed. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that yes, it's going to be one application per study, that the application has all the flexibility that's needed.
And it's notable, if you're rolling out per study, you need to budget 6 months, a year to develop it before it's ready to launch. Because again, as someone who teaches software engineering, these things take a while to develop, to test, to pilot, to
anything less than, honestly, any of these projects done less than 6 months is unrealistic. It's very, very unlikely that if you want to use a ResearchKit for a study, the development of that, regardless of how much resources how much funding you put on it and how many resources you have, it's unrealistic to get this done less than 4 to 6 months.
Once you already have developers identified.
And developers identified, the design completed and so on.
Yeah. So that is something which does come with Ethica, is this ability to quickly roll it out, finding a new study.
So again, it just depends on whether you need that flexibility or you need the or the options that this system offers addresses your needs. Oh, sorry. Yes, we are done anyway. So thank you. Oh well, was it at 3?
Yeah.
So you're 2 minutes off. You're good. Thank you.
Yes.